All right, friends, let's jump into this. So, welcome again to Art 202 Online for this module, Module 1, starting at Chapter 1. Um, Looking for the assigned readings, you can find that under Module 1 under the assigned readings assignment link. For this module, our main goals are going to be to describe art as a means of visual expression that uses various media and forms, to explain what is meant by creativity, to discuss the role that creativity plays in the work of trained and untrained artists, to assess the ways in which representational, abstract, and non-representational art relates to reality. We're going to contrast the terms looking and seeing and talk about the difference between those two. We're going to differentiate between form and content and show how artists may use iconography to communicate the latter. While considering and thinking over some of these goals, think about your own personal definition of art and what do you imagine art to be? What does it look like? What is its purpose? And take a moment to kind of answer those questions, maybe in your lecture notes or off to the side. This semester, I'd like for all of us to kind of reevaluate our own personal definitions of art and to try to reach a better understanding of the nature and purposes of art. And additionally, I hope that after the completion of this course, you'll be able to be more aware of creativity in your own daily life, kind of based off of the things that we've looked at. Um, One question I want to briefly ask is, why study art? I know a lot of you are not art majors, so let's kind of talk about a couple of the reasons why the study of art can be relevant to you or to those of who are not art majors, right? So these are by no means all of the reasons for studying art, but just a few that might be relevant to you. Um, So, why study art? The first one is to better understand the visuals that we encounter every day. Think about your normal day. You probably see art all around you from the time you wake up. Much of that comes in the form of graphic design, like advertising, things you see on social media, the internet, TV, posters, billboards. It's kind of everywhere, at this point, especially with kind of the explosion of people having a need for graphic design or having a desire for things to be designed well. You also interact with architecture every day. All the buildings you look at were at some point designed by somebody, and I kind of want everyone to be more aware of what our eyes are taking in all the time so that we can become informed consumers of all of this information as opposed to being passive consumers. The second point is, art informs our understanding, of culture, of our culture and the cultures of others. Um, a quote I like from Lyndon B. Johnson said that he said this about American art. Art is a nation of or art is a nation's most precious heritage, for it is in our works of art that we reveal to ourselves and others the inner vision which guides us as a nation. And where there is no vision, the people perish. So it's kind of interesting to think about art as vision casting, whether that is for the individual artist, a culture, or an entire nation. And the third point would be for enjoyment. By the end of the course, I hope that all of you will be able to visit an art museum or gallery and have a better understanding or better context for what you're seeing and what you're experiencing at that gallery. And hopefully, the more you understand art, the more you can enjoy it. Um, so before we move on to the actual content from the textbook, I kind of want you guys to think about your own personal definition of art. Many of us have never even maybe considered to try to define the word art. What do you imagine art to be? What does it look like? What is its purpose? And take a second to kind of answer some of those questions. You can just think about your answers. You don't have to necessarily um, write them down, or feel free to include them in your notes from this lecture. And like I said, for this semester, I'd like for all of us to kind of reevaluate our own personal definitions of art and try to reach a better understanding of the nature and purposes of art. And additionally, hope that after the completion of the course, you'll be more aware of creativity in your life. All right, so answering some questions. What is art? What is creativity? trained and untrained artists, and the purposes and functions of art. And this is the material that we're going to be covering in chapter 1. We'll be talking about that nature of art and creativity. And then we'll be addressing these two big questions, what is art, what is creativity? And once we've started kind of tackling those questions, which we'll continue to answer over the course of the semester, we'll touch on the nature of both trained and untrained artists. And we will also cover material from chapter 2 of your textbook. And we'll look at some of the reasons people make art and the ways that art functions. All right, so looking at this image, I want to talk about a couple things. So first, the ability to create is a special characteristic of humans. Art is a common experience that we all share. So starting out, I want to look at this artwork by Janet Eshelman. The title is "Her Secret is Patience." Some of you may see this work and immediately connect with it because of the color or the form or the way that the curves contrast with the boxy cityscape. However, we all have different aesthetic preferences. So for many of us, a greater understanding of art will help us to have better experience with specific works of art. Particularly like a large distinctive public artwork in Phoenix, Arizona, or inspired by the saguaro cactus, or the cactus flower that represents the city of Phoenix. Artistic creation is a two-way street. And even though we know the location of the work and some of the inspiration behind it, we're still left with some questions. So I found a TED Talk by the artist, and she explained some of her creative process and how she came to make such striking and large-scale works. So I don't believe the link will work directly in this particular video, so I'll link the link to this so that you guys can watch it, and then so you'll watch it and then proceed. Essentially, you'll pause this video and then watch it and then come back to it, right? So I'll have the link. Yeah, it's not working. I didn't think it would. So I'll have the link posted, and you'll watch it until 5 minutes and 18 seconds, and then after you've watched that, come back to this video, and we'll kind of break it down. So if you want to go ahead and pause, check the link out. I'll post it up. All right, so by now you should have checked out that video by Janet Eshelman. I'll post the link up and make an announcement that the link is available. So now that we have a little more information about the artist and her work, we have several ways to enter into an experience with the work. Maybe you're more interested in engineering or software that goes into the design of sculptures. Maybe you're interested in some of her inspiration, say, a cactus or a tsunami. But a part of our job as viewers is to find ways to understand an artist and his or her work better, and hopefully to enjoy it more. All right, so what is art? That's kind of one of the bigger questions. Art generally refers to music, theater, and literature. In this course, we'll specifically be focusing on the visual arts, including drawing, painting, sculpture, film, architecture, and design. One distinct characteristic of any form of art is that it communicates meaning beyond verbal exchange, right? So I'll say that again. A characteristic of any form of art is that it communicates meaning beyond verbal exchange. It's like what's the phrase? A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? The next part of a work of art is the medium, right? So a medium is chosen by the artist to enforce the function of the work. And what does that mean? So it essentially means that the medium that's chosen, whether it be paint as a medium, the artist is choosing that medium of paint to enforce the function of the work. So the paint will serve as the visual window to how we view the artwork. In the case of Janet's piece, Her Secret is Patience, the medium or the materials used is the flexible netting that responded to the wind, right? A medium can also refer to traditional or modern materials. And we're going to look at, a lot of different art media in this class. Traditional art media includes, oil painting, ceramic sculpture, printmaking techniques, and really nowadays, anything can be a medium. The people use staples and collected trash, or people paint with mud and tar, or like really anything can become a medium as long as it is enforcing the function of the work. Another term to think about is mixed media, which describes art that's created with a combination of materials. So that can be you know um, like found object sculptures are known as mixed media, or if people are combining different types of paints or different liquid medium to paint with something. That's another form of mixed media. The other big question we're tackling is what is creativity, and the definition says the ability to bring forth something new that has value. And notice in this definition of creativity itself, the something new that is created does not necessarily have to be art. Many people across all vocations employ creativity in their work and in their lives. Creative people have ideas that are relevant or can think of things in a new way, and creative thought also has potential to influence future thought or action. What is creativity? Again, the five traits that define creativity: associating, questioning, observing, networking, experimenting. You hear a lot of times people say, like, I'm not creative. You don't have to be an artist to be creative. Creativity is essential in life and every vocation. Your textbook says in section 1.2, I believe, it lists these five traits, and they're taken from the book Innovator's DNA and are discussed in detail in the text. And I suggest reading carefully over that list and thinking of the times when you've exemplified one or more of these traits, just to kind of connect the dots more. That you don't necessarily have to be an artist to be creative, right? Um, in this class, we'll focus specifically on visual creativity and the way that artists use imagery to communicate things beyond words. So one example of visual creativity is this series of photographs, He Got Game by Robin Rode. These photographs seem to have been relatively simple in execution, but are the result of a very clever idea. And they kind of tell a story. While it seems simple, the low tech chalk drawing of a baseball hoop, the artist is imitating slow motion photography and performs what would essentially be an impossible flip in real life. So creativity can more or less be like an attitude as well. Looking at this series of photographs where the crude drawing of the baseball net doesn't necessarily show like a mastery over drawing. It's more of just this, hey, I had this creative idea and I employed it through this method, right? So another big question: who can be an artist? Um, Trained artists are, today at art schools or universities. Folk artists are artists with little or no formal training. And then there's something also known as outsider art, which you'll read about a little bit in your book. And that's a personal expression created apart from any conventional practice or style. So, the urge to create is this universal thing that doesn't necessarily have to do anything with formal training. In the past, artists would learn their craft through apprenticeships, similar to how, um, you know, tattoo artists still go through apprenticeships nowadays, or, up until recently, you know, carpenters still have to go through apprenticeships, or, a lot of hairstylists might have to apprentice under somebody who's higher in that craft. Training's not always necessary nowadays, where many people take up art as just a second career or as a hobby. So moving forward, let's take a look at a couple examples of that and kind of learn the difference between the term folk art and outsider art. So folk artists are part of an established tradition of style, theme, and craftsmanship. They usually have little systematic art training, and they can take on many forms, like quilts or embroidered handkerchiefs, decorated weather vanes, sculptures, customized cars. Quilting traditions tend to be passed down from person to person, traditionally like woman to woman, and often the imagery is traditional to that culture or that region. And then outsider art, while folk artists generally work within a set tradition or traditions passed down, outsider art does not really, it doesn't really fit into any preconceived categories. Sabatino by Simon, one of the best known and largest pieces of outsider art in the US. It's more commonly known as Watts Towers because it's located in Watts, California. Um, it was this use of cast off materials, kind of what I described before. The medium could be found objects or trash, so these materials that were kind of cast off as useless or not needed anymore go undergo this transformation and showed like this creative ability to imagine new possibilities for just basic ordinary materials. The other cool thing about this is it was built over a period of 33 years. Um, and it was built without the use of power tools, rivets, welds, or bolts. It's literally just held together with steel rods, mesh, and like mortar or concrete, right? So it's this cool idea of like things that are found undergoing a transformation into something that is considered art, right? But this person necessarily doesn't have a formal art training. They've just compiled these things into what is looked at as a sculpture, right? Another good example of outsider art, um, this concrete fence is covered in bits of broken dishes, tile, melted glass, shells, or just like colorful junk, found from vacant lots in his neighborhood. And this is what this fence, encases around, this previous image that we saw over here. So the image is kind of dark, but in that lower section, this is what that fencing looks like. So it's kind of the same thing where it's like, he just assembled all of this junk and transformed it into something that we now consider art. Um, so another more local example of folk or outsider art is Mose Tolliver, also known as Mose T. This is one of the most well-known folk artists from Alabama. And he started making paintings after he was injured at work, and his paintings invented things as well as objects or scenes from his own experiences. He would just sell his paintings on his front porch. And primarily in his work, you'll see common subject matter like fancy animals or women. And nowadays, his paintings are highly collectible. Um, and so kind of just think about, why people may be attracted to this type of work when it feels childish. It actually can be kind of refreshing from all of the things that we're, used to seeing. Another good and probably obvious category of untrained artists are children, right? Most of us, probably drew pictures as kids, or even similar to this, it's just kind of the natural progression of things. You start to learn to write and read, and age 3, you know, that's an age where you can't read, but you understand visuals, and you're starting to make connections between, the way that things look in real life and how they're appearing to the child. So it's this really untrained feeling, but there's still representation. And the way that kids draw is just so confident, like they're just so they have a sense of they know what they're doing, and they don't worry about whether their drawings are good or bad. My kids do the same thing. They're just experimenting with mark making, and sometimes the drawings are supposed to represent something, and oftentimes they're just scribbling, or they want to draw shapes and they want to fill the shapes in. So this example is titled Elena by Grandma, or Elena Grandma, and it gives this intuitive sense of like composition. And kids really can't depict their world symbolically until about age 6. Um, and then generally we see studies show, kids begin to doubt their creativity by like 9 or 10 or so. So there's this fun, just really intuitive, naive time period where kids are just making art, and they don't care. They don't worry about it whether it's good or bad. They're just making, and they're just experimenting with marks and just, getting out there and doing the thing. All right, so rolling into, the functions and purposes of art. So we've begun to answer the questions, what is art, what is creativity, and we've kind of looked at a few ways that creativity can manifest itself in the work of trained and untrained artists. So let's kind of like dig deeper and look closer at some of the more specific purposes of art. Art satisfies specific needs. If I asked you to make a list of your basic needs, you'd probably say things like food, water, shelter. You might not immediately think that art can satisfy a need, but as humans, we have other needs that vary between, individuals and cultures. But each culture develops different art forms as a result of meaning, that are deep and that might necessarily be subtle as a society. Generally, they're public purposes, not personal goals of the artist, and art in its social and cultural context. Thinking back to those six functions, right? They may address more than one of them that we need. Um, so for chapter two, our what we'll be focusing on is kind of the ways in which artists transform objects for daily use. Kind of the embellishment of that. We'll describe how design and embellishment create visual delight in art, and we'll be comparing the different ways in which art can function as a means of communicating information. And then we'll discuss the use of art for both public and personal expression. And we will demonstrate how art can be used to meet religious and spiritual needs. And then lastly, we'll explain how art can be used for political purposes. So starting off, art for daily use, right? We listed food as, or assumed you would list food as one of your basic needs. But all of us also use utilitarian objects to serve the food we eat, right? So we're using these things, and this is an example of how an everyday object that has been transformed by an artist's thoughtful design, right? So the design of an object can change our experience of ordinary activities. And this term is known as embellishment, right? Um, so Eva Ziesel, this sauce boat with ladle, it shows a repetition of elements and form. There's a thoughtful choice of color, that the color of the sauce would contrast the white of the glaze on that ceramic piece. And, she's quoted that it's a playful search for beauty, right? These objects have been mass produced from an original design and now are widely available. And it's just an interesting spin on, how do we take these objects that we use every day and make them beautiful, right? Artists often transform objects that are made for daily use. Like, do you have a favorite coffee mug or favorite device? Most of these things were thoughtfully designed by someone not only to work well and do their job, but to give us that visual pleasure that we're looking for, right? Another great example of this is George Nakashima's conoid chair, right? It's this crazy shape as an addendum to like the normal chair that we sit in, and immediately looking at it, you're like, yeah, that would fall over, right? Um, it's this one of a kind, just it only exists in this one place by this one guy, and in its design, it was made to move efficiently over carpet, right? So it had a very specific design, right? It's a chair. And then not only is it a chair, it was designed to move across carpet efficiently. And then it's visually interesting in a way that you probably haven't seen a chair be, right? So keeping those things in mind, that's a great example of that embellishment, right? So art for daily use, embellishment. Another way that artists take everyday objects more visually interesting is embellishment. Shelter is a basic need, and that's where architects come in, right? Architects and designers can make our surroundings distinctive. And you can see here how the architect Frank Lloyd Wright has used embellishment to make this home visually appealing, right? This is known as Hollycock, or Barnsdale House in Hollywood. Its design scheme is based on these repeated hollyhock flowers that are kind of above that doorway there that kind of wrap around. Um, these functional objects we've looked at so far serve more than one purpose, right? They satisfy a need, they're useful on a daily basis, but they're also visually pleasing. You know, my day is more enjoyable when I'm surrounded by objects that are thoughtfully designed, you know. So the next purpose of art that we'll be discussing is to be visually delightful, right? So art for visual delight, you know, idealism. Um, Delight is often seen as a principal goal of art. And this happens when we're captivated by the way a work of art looks. You know, we can enjoy it aside from practical or moral or political considerations. And this idea is explored in the study of aesthetics. You've probably heard that term before, right? You know, it's a branch of philosophy that studies how and why artworks are considered beautiful. And, you know, beautiful being something that is pleasing to the eye and is agreeable to the mind, and it varies across cultures, you know. So some artists have pursued the idea of beauty by seeking an ideal, which is idealism. And beauty is found in something that is ideal or close to perfection. Behind much of the art that's created in ancient Greece, which we'll see, you know, a little bit later in the semester. Um, a good example is the charioteer sculpture. You know, it's balanced, it's quiet dignity. You know, much of the work that's being created today is less concerned with idealism than, you know, the Greeks were. But we do see idealistic standards in the media and in fashion, right? So most of us, you know, we celebrate beauty, right? That's what we do, you know. You know, this quote: "A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases; it will never pass into nothingness, but will still keep a bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams, and health and quiet breathing." You know, so beauty's been celebrated in all the arts, you know, not just visual arts. And you've probably come across these words celebrating beauty at some point. You know, maybe, you know, we've already said that beauty can be achieved by pursuing an ideal, but we also see beauty in objects that have harmony, which brings us to the next point of art for visual delight, focusing particularly on harmony. You know, a definite good definition for harmony is something that is a pleasing balance or has harmonious proportions, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about balance in chapter 4. So this piece by Claude Lorraine, Ascanius shooting the stag of Sylvia, right? The colors are harmonious, the buildings are balanced on the left by the trees and cliffs offset on the right. The light is evenly diffused. The term picturesque is used to describe this style of painting, and it means like resembling the resemblance of this painting. So even though many of us have not yet have that vocabulary to explain why an object is beautiful or not, we can intuitively pinpoint the beauty of a painting. And you know, beauty can obviously be somewhat subjective. You know, something that I think I might find beauty and you might think is ugly, and vice versa. You know, and that's why you'll hear pretty frequently, you know, that art is subjective. Um, so art for communicating information or storytelling. Art is often used to impart information or ideas. And you know, before photography, artists and illustrators only source of information about visual appearance, right? Artists have shaped the way that people understand the world and the way that their culture is viewed by others. And through storytelling, you know, a great deal of art tells stories, you know, about personal stories, moral stories, historical stories. Some art tells stories of everyday life. They can help broaden perspective and show how other people live. Um, this piece up here by Abraham Cruvilega, um, Auto Construction Suites, is this kind of storytelling of this seemingly disorderly representation of an artist's family home, right? So it's objects gathered from an artist's immediate neighborhood. It's construction of this installation that parallels the construction of the artist's family home, right? His relatives build the home themselves, room by room, using whatever materials they could find or afford. And it's just this cool kind of like looking into this this photograph, of this installation, you can kind of pick apart these like everyday objects that have been found and placed. Another good example of storytelling is by Carrie Mae Weems, the Kitchen Table series. So the photos reveal the lives of another person. They reveal those lives to us through a series of photographs, which was taken over a series of months. They tell a story about a particular family and particular relationships. And so she set this camera up and just observed different interactions that happened around this kitchen table, and you think about if you think about it, like how many different things happen in different ways around specific places in your home, and this is kind of an example of that. Another example is art for public or personal expression, also known as commemoration. So sometimes a culture needs a monument in order to commemorate a person or event, right? Many monuments in the ancient world had a commemorative function. Like the pyramids, for example, were the tombs of ancient Egyptian rulers, right? Um, this example is the Taj Mahal, and it commemorates the ruler's favorite wife. And it was a testament to romantic love and devotion. And I'm sure you've heard of the Taj Mahal. It draws visitors from literally across the world. People come from all over just to see this work of art that is essentially just a building. Another example is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It bears the names of 60,000 servicemen and women who died or are missing from the war. And although the design was controversial at first, the monument has influenced many other public memorials since then. And the inscribing of the names of all commemorated people has become more of a common practice now amongst public memorials. So, moving on is art for public or personal expression or self expression. The last two works we looked at serve as a public function. Many artists use their work more for personal expression, right? Self expression has increasingly become one of art's most common functions, where, as time goes back, art had more specific functions where nowadays a lot of people are making art for themselves or to embody ideas that they have on their own, that are devoid of other other reasons, if that makes sense. So expressive function, when an artist conveys information, can convey their personalities, their feelings, their worldview. This piece by Frida Kahlo, I'm sure you've heard her name before. If not, definitely look her up. This is known as the broken column. And so just by looking at the piece, you can probably, pick apart a couple things. First off, Kahlo was known for her self portraits, right? The majority of her work are her self portraits, and that's what she's known for. And she created some of the most self expressive work of the 20th century. So most of them are autobiographical, they're not usually literal. This specific one, she was referencing the way her body was broken in an accident, and she was actually forced to wear a brace, much like the one pictured in this painting, for the majority of her life. And this type of self portrait is just one form that an artist's expression can take, right? Where it's not necessarily realistic because obviously her body isn't just permanently split open, but she's trying to express an inward feeling that she has, right? So next up is art for the spirit or worship and ritual. So the majority of the world's religions have incorporated artist creativity into sacred rituals, places, and ceremonies as a way to exemplify, the space that they're existing in. So this cathedral specifically, Saint Chapelle in Paris, is an example of a work of architecture created to enhance the experience of worship and ritual. So it was a building intended for gathering, but also was visually striking and was designed to impress people that came to visit and to gather. Um, the goal was for it to resemble like a giant jewelry box. And its original function actually was as a storehouse for precious relics. But what you're mainly seeing is just an overusage of stained glass windows to let in symbolic light, but the actual imagery on the stained glass tells, stories from the Bible, which is pretty common. Um, Art for the spirituality, though, is generally contemporary, and contemporary spirituality can take on many forms. It's not necessarily connected with an organized religion, um, but art can assist some of them. So this example by Nancy Holt expresses and represents the vastness of the landscape, and it's not necessarily tied to a religion, but it is a spiritual work, right? Because it has those spiritual connotations. So next up is art for political purposes. So we've got two, and the first we'll look at is protest. So many artists use their work to get involved with politics. So they can express, political goals or ideas, or some, are using art to persuade or submit to authority. Others express protest or have encouraged revolt. Um, this piece by Kath Kollwitz, Art of Human Concern, uh, devoted her career to art that took political positions, right? So much of her work was responding to events of her time. It was a series of prints that encouraged workers and peasants to protest and struggle. It was controversial, but grew a lot of reputation among artists, and the Nazis actually forbid her from exhibiting her work in public. But she just kept on making prints because that's what you do. The last example of art for specific purposes, this one being for political purposes, is persuasion, right? So um, propaganda is also a good example of that, to persuade you to think a certain way, right? So persuasion invites and urges us to do something or to think things we may not have otherwise. This piece by Shepard Fairey, fun fact if you don't know, Shepard Fairey is also the main designer for the clothing brand Obey. He's a street artist, and he uses his screen printed aesthetic to create a poster promoting Barack Obama as the Democratic nominee for president, right? He chose an image that resembles a well known photograph of President Kennedy, and then he used red, white, and blue color palettes because they are patriotic, they're appealing. Um, and this is an image that is calculated to reinforce belief in specific characteristics of a presidential candidate. Um, so to kind of wrap up, right, what have we learned? We defined art is the visual expression of an idea or an experience, and it's formed with skill through the use of a medium. And then we define creativity separately as the ability to bring forth something new that has value, right? And we looked at some of the various ways that artists use their creativity, whether it be to create objects for daily life, for visual delight, to communicate information, public or personal expression, for the spirit, or even for political purposes. Um, so yeah, be sure, complete your lecture notes, submit them by the deadline. And then, remember you have questions to address at the end of your notes, which are in those, it's in that link. So to go over them quick or just briefly, how does the book definition of art compare to your own personal definition of art? And where do you see creativity in your everyday life, right? So make sure to answer those, get the lecture notes submitted up. September 6th is the deadline for the quiz and for the lecture notes. And as always, email me if you have any questions about anything at all. Hopefully nobody has issues with this video as we have with the past video. If anybody's having issues viewing it, let me know. I'm just going to go ahead and throw this one up straight as public. I'm not even going to try to do it as whatever the other word was, like hidden or whatever. So I'm just going to throw it straight up as public. So hopefully nobody should have any issues. So let me know. Hit me up. Good luck.